Synesius was 21 years old when he first walked through Alexandria's streets searching for a philosopher, and he had absolutely no idea what he was looking for. Money? He had that. His family owned vast estates across Libya, golden fields of wheat that stretched to horizons where earth met sky in shimmering heat. Education? His Cyrene tutors had drilled him in rhetoric, logic, the fundamental structures of mathematics. Ambition? Dreams of civic leadership danced through his thoughts. Political influence beckoned with seductive promises, and perhaps, if the gods smiled and circumstances aligned perfectly, even a bishopric might crown his future career. Purpose, though, that remained elusive. The ship from Cyrene had required 3 days of Mediterranean crossings, waves that rolled endlessly beneath creaking timbers. His brother Euoptius accompanied him, and both young aristocrats wore fine tunics that announced their status to anyone with eyes to see. Together they walked past the great harbor where cargo vessels from across the known world unloaded their treasures. Grain from Egypt, papyrus from the Delta, blown glass from Phoenicia, silk that had traveled impossible distances from mysterious eastern lands. The pharaoh's lighthouse dominated everything, its eternal flame visible for miles even in brutal daylight. A beacon guiding sailors for 5 centuries, outlasting empires and dynasties and the ambitions of countless men who thought they would live forever. Alexandria smelled like every port city Synesius had ever visited: saltwater. Human sweat mixing with spilled wine, the acrid smoke of thousands of cooking fires blending improbably with expensive perfumes from the spice markets, fish rotting in the sun, frankincense burning in temples. The particular stench of humanity concentrated in too small a space for too long, but Synesius wasn't searching for merchants, or sailors, or any of the usual attractions that drew young aristocrats to Alexandria's legendary streets. He was looking for her. "They say she wears a man's cloak," Euoptius muttered, navigating around a cluster of Syrian merchants arguing over textile prices. "Walks around the city like she owns it, like gender doesn't matter when you're discussing Plato." "They say she's the greatest mathematician alive," Synesius corrected, dodging a cart loaded with amphoras. "Greater than anyone in Athens, Constantinople, or Rome." "They say a lot of things." Euoptius sounded skeptical. "You know how stories grow when they travel. Picture Alexandria in the year 393. The city had functioned as humanity's intellectual capital for 7 centuries. Euclid had walked these very marble streets proving his geometric theorems. Archimedes had studied here before returning to Sicily. The great library had once contained every book humanity had managed to write about mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, medicine, poetry. Now most of that library was gone, consumed by fires that seemed to devour everything eventually, lost to the casual violence of empire and the deliberate destruction of those who feared knowledge. But Alexandria still mattered, still drew scholars from across the Mediterranean world, still represented the place where Greek philosophy encountered Egyptian mysticism, where students traveled when they wanted to learn from the absolute best. And the best, according to every person Synesius had asked, was a woman named Hypatia. Think carefully about what that meant. A woman, teaching philosophy at the highest levels, leading an actual school with real students and a serious reputation, commanding intellectual authority. This happened in an era when women couldn't own property in most cities, couldn't testify in courts of law, couldn't even walk through public spaces without male escorts protecting their supposed virtue. Yet here existed someone who not only taught, but commanded crowds of listeners, who not only wrote commentaries on Ptolemy's astronomical tables and Apollonius's geometric conics, but actually improved upon their mathematics, who wore the tribon, that distinctive philosopher's cloak, as naturally as breathing, as if gender were utterly irrelevant when measured against wisdom and intellectual achievement. Impossible. Synesius needed to see this with his own eyes. They discovered her school in Alexandria's Greek quarter, housed in a structure that resembled any wealthy citizen's home from the exterior. Whitewashed walls gleaming in afternoon sun, a courtyard visible through the main entrance, the sound of animated voices carrying through thick summer heat. A modest crowd had gathered near the doorway. Men in various states of dress ranging from simple working tunics to elaborate robes marking aristocratic status. Some appeared to be regular students, carrying wax tablets and papyrus scrolls. Others seemed to be curious citizens who had simply stopped to listen to whatever wisdom might emerge from those walls. Synesius heard her voice before he saw her face. "You're thinking about this completely wrong." Clear, precise, cutting through the background murmur of the crowd like a knife through silk. Apollonius didn't discover conic sections because he was interested in geometry for its own sake. He discovered them because he was interested in truth, in the underlying reality that mathematics helps us see. The crowd shifted slightly, and suddenly Synesius caught his first glimpse of the woman who would change his life. She stood in the central courtyard, perhaps 35 years old, wearing a simple white tribon that reached to her ankles without any of the decorative flourishes that wealthy women typically favored. Her dark hair was pulled back severely from her face. No jewelry adorned her throat or wrists. No makeup enhanced her features. Nothing signaled wealth or social status except the unmistakable authority in her voice and the remarkable way every person in that crowded courtyard leaned toward her as if pulled by invisible threads of attention. In her hands, she held a piece of papyrus covered in geometric diagrams, neat lines, perfect circles, carefully labeled angles. "Look at this cone," she commanded, holding the diagram higher so everyone could see. Cut it parallel to the base, you get a perfect circle. Cut it at an angle, an ellipse emerges. Cut it steeper, now you've created a parabola. Steeper still, a hyperbola appears. 4 completely different curves, all hiding inside the same simple three-dimensional form. So what does that tell you about the nature of reality itself? Silence. Complete, focused attention. Synesius realized he was holding his breath. A young man near the front, Egyptian, judging by his darker coloring and the style of his tunic, tentatively raised one hand. That forms are multiple. That one thing can contain many things? No. Hypatia's voice intensified without growing louder, a trick of emphasis that commanded even greater attention. That forms are shadows cast by deeper truths. Plato already told you this centuries ago, but you weren't listening carefully enough. The material world. These curves you can draw with compasses, measure with rulers, calculate using Euclid's formulas. They're all imperfect reflections of perfect mathematical forms that exist in the eternal realm of pure ideas. When you study mathematics, you're not simply learning about shapes and numbers. You're training yourself to see past the shadows flickering on the cave wall to perceive the source of the light itself. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed or shifted weight or looked away. Mathematics is spiritual discipline, Hypatia continued, her gaze sweeping across the assembled students with laser focus. Every single proof that carries you from particular instances to general principles, from individual triangles to universal truths about all triangles everywhere, that's not just logical exercise. That's practice for the real journey your soul must make, from multiplicity to unity, from material to immaterial, from the many scattered things of this world to the one eternal source of all being. She paused deliberately, allowing the weight of those words to settle. Her gaze swept past Synesius without pausing, assessing each listener. That's precisely why we study astronomy in this school, not merely to predict eclipses, though we do that. Not simply to calculate planetary positions for astrological charts, though we must master those techniques. We study the heavens because they represent the closest approach to perfection that we can observe while still trapped in bodies that demand food and sleep and inevitably die. The sphere of the fixed stars moves in perfect circles, eternal, unchanging. When you calculate the complex motions of celestial bodies using Ptolemy's mathematical models, you're not just doing astronomy, you're contemplating the divine order itself. Someone in the crowd asked a question Synesius couldn't quite hear. Hypatia's smile appeared and vanished in an instant, sharp, knowing, slightly amused. You want to know whether I'm teaching religion or mathematics? The question reveals your confusion. For the true philosopher, for anyone seriously pursuing wisdom, reason, and religion are absolutely inseparable. You cannot approach the divine without understanding proportion, harmony, the elegant mathematical structures underlying all of reality. And conversely, you cannot truly understand mathematics, not at the deepest level, without recognizing that you're studying the mind of God made visible in geometric relationships and astronomical notions. The assembled crowd erupted in questions, hands raised, voices overlapping. Hypatia answered some queries directly, deflected others with suggestions for further reading, assigned specific texts to students who seemed to be regular members of the school. The gathering gradually began to disperse. Synesius watched, fascinated as she gave individual attention to 3 or 4 people. That same intense focus she'd directed at the larger group now concentrated like sunlight through a lens on each questioner. Then her dark eyes locked onto him. "You're new, not a question." A simple observation delivered with absolute certainty from Cyrene. Synesius discovered his mouth had gone completely dry. "My brother and I, we want to study. With you, if you'll accept us." Why? The single word landed like a physical blow. Not, "What can you afford to pay?" Not, "What mathematical knowledge do you already possess?" Not, "Do you have letters of introduction?" Just, "Why?" The honest answer escaped before Synesius could calculate a more impressive response. "Because I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing with my life. And everyone in Cyrene, everyone whose opinion I respect, told me you might be able to help me figure that out." Complete honesty, probably too honest. Definitely not the sophisticated answer she likely expected. Euoptia shot him a look that clearly communicated, "What are you doing?" But Hypatia's severe expression softened almost imperceptibly. "At least you're not lying to impress me. That's better than most." She gestured toward the building behind her. School meets every morning, beginning exactly 2 hours after dawn. We start with geometry, foundations, then advanced topics. Move to astronomy and mathematical calculation of celestial motions. End with philosophical discussion connecting what we've learned to larger questions about reality, knowledge, the good life. You'll need copies of Euclid's Elements, all 13 books, not just the easy ones. Apollonius's Conics, at least the first 4 books, possibly more depending on how quickly you progress. Plato's Republic and Timaeus for philosophy. Plotinus's Enneads for understanding Neoplatonist metaphysics. Can you afford to acquire those texts? Yes. Can you read Greek fluently? Not stumbling through simple passages, but actually reading complex philosophical and mathematical texts? Of course. I'm Libyan, not barbarian. The ghost of a smile. Can you prove the Pythagorean theorem from first principles? Synesius hesitated fatally. He'd learned it years ago. Every educated person knew the basic relationship. But actually proving it rigorously. I probably could work it out. Then your first assignment is to prove it. 3 completely different ways by tomorrow morning's class. Her tone brooked no negotiation. If you can't manage that, you're not ready for this school. We don't memorize formulas here. We understand why they must be true. She started to turn away, then paused as if remembering something. What are your actual names, Synesius of Cyrene? This is my brother Euoptius. Welcome to Alexandria, Synesius, and Euoptius of Cyrene. She walked back toward the building's interior. Over her shoulder, "Don't be late tomorrow. I begin exactly at dawn plus 2 hours. Late arrivals distract everyone and waste valuable time." The crowd had completely dispersed now. Synesius stood alone in the courtyard beside his brother, feeling like he'd just survived some kind of intense examination without knowing whether he'd passed or failed spectacularly. "She's absolutely terrifying. Euoptius said quietly. Yes, Synesius agreed. I think I need to study with her for as long as she'll possibly let me. That night, back in the modest rooms they'd rented near the harbor district, Synesius spread out papyrus sheets and ink and tried desperately to remember everything his childhood tutors had taught him about right triangles. The Pythagorean theorem, in any right triangle, the square of the hypotenuse equals the sum of the squares of the other two sides. He knew it was true, had seen it demonstrated, had used it in practical calculations. But prove it, rigorously, 3 entirely different ways? Hours bled into each other. Ink stained his fingers black. He drew triangles, then squares constructed on their sides, then rectangles, then more triangles, trying to see the hidden relationships that Euclid had perceived 2,700 years earlier. Euoptius fell asleep, snoring softly. The oil lamp guttered and required refilling. The night watch called the hours. Still Synesius worked, driven by something he couldn't quite name. Fear of disappointing Hypatia, perhaps, or excitement at finally finding a challenge worthy of his abilities. Finally, near midnight, the first proof suddenly clicked into place like a lock opening, a visual demonstration using similar triangles whose proportions revealed the theorem's truth. Then a second proof emerged, this one using area calculations that transformed geometric shapes into numerical relationships. The third proof consumed him until nearly dawn, an algebraic approach that felt less like invention and more like discovering something that had always existed, waiting for someone to notice it. When he walked into Hypatia's school the next morning, exhausted, ink-stained, running on perhaps 2 hours of sleep, she examined his work for approximately 30 seconds. The third proof contains a circular argument. You assumed what you were trying to prove in step 4, which invalidates everything that follows. She handed the papyrus back without ceremony. But the first 2 are rigorous and correct, and the mere fact that you attempted a third original approach demonstrates you're actually thinking instead of just regurgitating memorized material. Sit down. He sat. Around him, perhaps 15 other students were arranging themselves in a rough semicircle on the floor. Egyptian faces, Syrian features, Greek coloring, one young man who looked like he might have traveled from Constantinople itself. All men, of course, all men. All focused with complete intensity on the woman in the white tribon who had just picked up a fresh geometric diagram and was preparing to change how Synesius understood reality. We begin, Hypatia announced, with the sphere. What happened over the following weeks bore no resemblance to education as Synesius had previously experienced it. His comfortable Cyrene tutors had taught facts, dates to memorize, names to recognize, formulas to apply. Hypatia taught methods. She presented problems with no obvious solutions and simply watched as students struggled, intervening only when someone's approach was fundamentally flawed. She asked questions that seemed deceptively simple until you actually tried to answer them. What precisely is a mathematical point? Can something truly be infinite? Does mathematical truth exist independently of human minds, or do we create it through our reasoning? More importantly, more transformatively, she taught them to perceive connections invisible to ordinary vision. One morning, she demonstrated with elegant precision how the exact same mathematical principles describing planetary orbits also explained light reflection, the trajectory of thrown stones, the optimal shape of ship sails catching wind. The cosmos, she insisted, her voice carrying absolute conviction, is not a random collection of separate phenomena happening to occur in the same universe. It's a unified whole, governed by universal laws that mathematics allows us to glimpse. When you understand the ellipse as an abstract form existing in the realm of pure ideas, you simultaneously understand something profound about Mars's orbit, about how properly shaped mirrors focus light, about proportional relationships in art and architecture. One truth, infinite manifestations. Another day, she distributed crude bronze discs to each student and issued a challenge. Design a working astrolabe, an instrument for measuring star positions. No instructions, no examples. You know geometry, you know astronomy from our lessons. Figure it out. Synesius spent 3 solid days on that assignment, time blurring into obsessive focus. He consulted with other students, leading to passionate arguments about whether the ecliptic should be marked in precise degrees or traditional zodiac signs. He made errors requiring complete reconstruction. He fought with Euoptius about gear ratios and angular measurements. When he finally presented his design to Hypatia, she studied it with that same intense concentration she brought to everything. "This would actually work," she said, tracing the bronze circles with one finger. "It's not elegant. You're wasting material here where these sections overlap unnecessarily, and your degree markings would prove difficult to read in low-light conditions. But the underlying mathematics is sound. Now answer this. Why do we need an astrolabe? What's the point of this tool? To measure star positions accurately. Why? To track celestial motion over time. Why does that matter?" Synesius thought harder, trying to connect the practical tool to larger principles she'd been teaching. Because the heavens represent perfection in motion, and we're imperfect. So studying perfect circular motion helps us understand what perfection actually looks like, gives us a model for approaching the divine. That rare, quick smile appeared and vanished. Remember that thought. Hold on to it. You're going to need it next week when we begin reading Plotinus. Imagine what this was like. Every comfortable assumption systematically questioned, every formula traced backward to its fundamental axioms, every measurement connected to philosophical truths about reality's structure. Hypatia didn't merely teach mathematics. She taught how to think rigorously, how to question everything, including your own reasoning, how to perceive patterns underlying phenomena that appeared completely different on the surface. And the conversations didn't stop when formal class ended. The students formed genuine friendships transcending their wildly different backgrounds. Synesius, the wealthy Christian aristocrat from Libya, became improbably close with Olympius, a dedicated pagan philosopher from Egypt. They'd spend hours in Alexandria's crowded marketplaces arguing about Plato's theory of forms or whether Aristotle's physics correctly described motion. When Synesius struggled with a particularly dense passage in the Enneads, Plotinus's writing could be maddeningly obscure. It was another Christian student named Hesychius who patiently explained the concept of the One as ultimate reality beyond all being and non-being, different. In almost every conceivable way, religion, nationality, social class, philosophical inclinations, career ambitions. What united them was Hypatia. Her teaching created a remarkable community where those differences became fascinating rather than threatening, where a Christian could study pagan philosophy without crisis of faith, where a woman could command intellectual authority without anyone seriously questioning whether her gender somehow invalidated her wisdom. Notice what just happened there. Synesius, Christian, Olympius, pagan. Yet they were genuine friends, the deep kind who stayed up past midnight debating ideas, who helped each other through difficult texts, who remained in regular contact for years after leaving Alexandria's intellectual hothouse. In 400 Common Era, this was genuinely radical. The Roman Empire was fragmenting along religious fault lines that grew wider daily. Christian emperors were systematically closing pagan temples. Pagan philosophers accused Christians of deliberately destroying classical learning. Mobs clashed in city streets over theological differences that seemed, to any rational outside observer, impossibly subtle. 3 natures, or one. Homoousios, or homoousios. Men literally killed each other over a single Greek letter's difference. But in Hypatia's school, absolutely none of that mattered. "Mathematics doesn't care about your theology," she told them once, her voice carrying that particular intensity she reserved for important principles. A triangle's angles sum to exactly 180 degrees, whether you're Christian, pagan, Jewish, or worship the ancient Egyptian gods. Truth is simply truth. Your job as philosophers, your only job, is to find it wherever it leads, even if it leads you to respect people whose beliefs differ fundamentally from yours. She lived this principle without compromise. Her closest mathematical collaborator was her father Theon, a pagan. Her most devoted students included future Christian bishops. Her friend and political protector was Orestes, the imperial prefect, a Christian administrator. She moved between these worlds with remarkable ease, treating religious difference as genuinely irrelevant compared to the shared pursuit of wisdom. Synesius absorbed this lesson like water soaking into parched ground. Years later, after becoming bishop of Ptolemais, he would steadfastly refuse to condemn pagan philosophers, insisting that truth and error could coexist in the same person, that a pagan could teach profound wisdom about mathematics and philosophy even while being mistaken about God's nature. But he wasn't bishop yet. He was just a confused, 21-year-old student struggling with Apollonius's conic sections and wondering how three-dimensional geometry could possibly teach him anything meaningful about encountering the divine. One afternoon, perhaps 6 months into his studies, Hypatia called him aside after class ended. "You've been working obsessively on the Astrolabe design," she observed. "I've seen your latest modifications, the improvements you've made." Yes. Synesius had become genuinely obsessed with the problem, unable to shake the nagging feeling that his first design was too crude, too inefficient, missing some elegant solution. "I think I've finally found a way to include all the zodiac calculations you suggested while simultaneously reducing the overall weight by, it's genuinely good work." She handed him a rolled papyrus covered in her own meticulous diagrams. "These are my personal notes on a silver astrolabe I've been designing for several years. See if any of this helps your project forward." Synesius unrolled the papyrus slowly, studying the precision of her calculations, reading annotations that revealed years of thought concentrated on this single scientific instrument. "You're actually sharing this with me. Your own research? Knowledge exists to be shared and improved." Hypatia's voice was matter-of-fact, as if this were obvious. "If your design improves upon mine, excellent. That's intellectual progress. If mine helps you avoid errors I've already discovered, good. That's efficient use of time. Either way, we both move closer to building a better tool for studying the heavens. That's the only goal that matters. Thank you." The words felt desperately inadequate. "I mean, teacher, benefactress, Hypatia is fine. We're collaborators now, Synesius. You've earned that status." He walked out of that school building feeling 10 feet tall, not because she praised him, though she had. Not because she'd given him valuable research notes, though she had done that too. But because she'd treated him as an equal partner in the timeless pursuit of knowledge. A junior partner, certainly, a student with vast amounts still to learn. But someone whose ideas actually mattered, whose work contributed meaningfully to a tradition of scientific instrument, making stretching back centuries and hopefully continuing for centuries more. This was Hypatia's greatest gift, making her students believe they were part of something vastly larger than themselves. That their geometric proofs and astronomical calculations connected them directly to Plato, to Euclid, to Ptolemy, to every philosopher who had ever gazed at the stars and wondered about truth. Time flowed like water through Alexandria's ancient streets. Weeks accumulated into months, months transformed into years. Synesius and Euoptius remained, learning everything Hypatia could teach, and her knowledge seemed genuinely inexhaustible. Geometry, astronomy, precise techniques for constructing astronomical instruments, methods for calculating eclipse predictions, how to argue philosophical positions you didn't personally believe just for the mental discipline of seeing all sides of complex questions. Eventually, inevitably, reality intruded. Family obligations called Synesius back to Cyrene. His father was aging, the estates required competent management. Euoptius had already returned home months earlier. Synesius packed his belongings, mostly books and papers now, including heavily annotated copies of Euclid and Apollonius covered in marginal notes from Hypatia's lectures, and prepared to leave Alexandria's intellectual paradise. His final meeting with Hypatia lasted perhaps 10 minutes. "You've learned remarkably well," she told him. "Don't stop now. Keep studying, keep questioning everything. And when you encounter problems you genuinely can't solve alone, write to me. I will. I promise. Promise me something else." She held his gaze with that laser intensity. "Whatever you do with your life, politics, church work, managing those wheat fields in Cyrene, don't ever forget that philosophy isn't merely a hobby for wealthy young men. It's a complete way of life. Mathematics teaches you to think with absolute clarity. Astronomy teaches you to see beyond immediate material concerns. Neoplatonism teaches you that worldly success means nothing compared to wisdom. Remember those lessons when Alexandria is far away." "I promise," he said again, meaning it with desperate sincerity. "Good." She handed him a small package wrapped in clean linen. "Don't open this until you reach home." Back in Cyrene, after the familiar 3-day voyage, after greeting family and inspecting estates and handling the 1,000 small details of aristocratic life, Synesius finally unwrapped Hypatia's mysterious package. Inside, a small mechanical device, bronze and silver, intricate gears meshing perfectly, marked circles showing celestial coordinates. An astrolabe, not his design, hers, the one she'd been perfecting while he studied with her. Perfect proportions. Elegant solutions to every problem he'd struggled with, a masterpiece of mathematical precision and skilled craftsmanship, and a note in her precise handwriting for calculating the positions of the stars. "For remembering that you will always be my student." Synesius kept that astrolabe for the rest of his life. He wrote to her, naturally, dozens of letters over the following years, maybe more. Questions about Ptolemy's astronomical tables and their accuracy. Problems with hydraulic instruments he was attempting to design. Philosophical puzzles he couldn't quite resolve alone. Even requests for her opinion on his poetry. Yes, poetry, because Hypatia had taught him that mathematics and art were intimately connected, that proportion in verse directly echoed proportion in geometry. Her replies don't survive. Every single letter Hypatia wrote has been lost to history's casual destruction. We possess Synesius's words to her, but not her words to him, creating a maddening one-sided conversation across 16 centuries. But we can infer from his letters that she kept writing faithfully, kept advising, kept being the teacher she had always been. In 402, Synesius sent her a detailed letter describing a device he'd invented for measuring liquid density, a hydroscope, he called it. The letter reads exactly like an eager student showing homework to a beloved teacher, desperately hoping for approval. "Here's what I've designed. Here's precisely how it works. Does this make sense?" Have I missed anything obvious? Nearly 10 years after leaving Alexandria, he still needed her validation, still valued her opinion above all others. Around 410, nearly 17 years after Synesius first walked into her school, he faced an impossible decision. The church wanted to make him bishop of Ptolemais, him, the devoted student of a pagan philosopher. The man who still addressed Hypatia as mother, sister, teacher, benefactress in his regular letters. He nearly refused the honor. How could he become a Christian bishop while maintaining close friendship with a pagan teacher? How could he reconcile church doctrine demanding absolute truth claims with the Neoplatonist philosophy Hypatia had taught him? But Hypatia had taught him something else crucial, that truth could exist in multiple forms simultaneously, that Christianity and philosophy didn't have to be mortal enemies, that wisdom transcended religious boundaries. He accepted the bishopric, and he kept writing to Hypatia. Think about what that means. A Christian bishop, formally responsible for defending orthodox doctrine against heresy, maintaining regular open correspondence with a pagan philosopher. Not hiding it, not apologizing for it. Openly acknowledging that this woman had shaped his mind, his character, his entire understanding of reality in ways his Christian education never had. Other bishops condemned this. Other Christian leaders did condemn relationships between Christians and pagans. But Synesius never wavered. Hypatia was his teacher. That bond transcended religion. He wasn't unique. The other students from Hypatia's school, they all remained friends across decades. They all kept writing to each other. They all openly acknowledged their debt to the woman who had taught them not just mathematics, but how to think, how to seek truth regardless of where it might lead. This was Hypatia's lasting achievement. Not her commentaries on Apollonius, brilliant though those were, not her improvements to the Astrolabe, significant though those proved, not even her position as head of the Platonist school, revolutionary though that was. Her achievement was creating a community of thinkers who believed that wisdom mattered more than religious identity. That mathematical truth was genuinely universal, that a diverse group of students could become lifelong friends united by their shared pursuit of knowledge. She built bridges in an age of walls. She taught tolerance in an age of sectarian violence. She demonstrated that women could lead intellectually in a world systematically designed to silence them. And for a few years, miraculously, it worked. Synesius died around 413 or 414, probably never knowing what would happen to his teacher. The letters simply stop. The historical record goes silent on his final years. But at least he died believing that the world Hypatia had created, the world of tolerance and intellectual friendship, might somehow survive. It wouldn't. 7 letters survive. 7 letters from Synesius to Hypatia, spanning nearly 2 decades of devotion. In them, you can trace his transformation from eager young student to mature thinker, from confused aristocrat searching for purpose to Christian bishop. From someone desperately seeking direction to someone who found it in the lessons a pagan philosopher taught him about truth, wisdom, and the mathematical structures underlying reality. In one letter, he asks for her help designing a mechanical device. In another, he shares his poetry and requests honest critique. In a third, he describes his struggles with church politics and clearly values her counsel on navigating power while maintaining personal integrity. In a fourth, he addresses her as mother, sister, teacher, benefactress, 4 different roles, none quite capturing the relationship, but together suggesting something profound and lasting. These fragments are all we have. Hypatia's replies are gone, her mathematical commentaries are lost, her astronomical observations survive only as brief references in other people's work. The woman herself exists now only in fragments, quotations, descriptions, the influence she had on students who wrote about her with reverence. But those 7 letters tell us everything we need to know. They tell us that a teacher's greatest legacy isn't what they write, but who they teach. They tell us that intellectual community can transcend religious difference for a time. They tell us that a 21-year-old student searching for purpose in Alexandria's crowded streets could find it in the precise voice of a woman explaining how conic sections revealed divine truth. They tell us that Synesius never stopped being her student, even as bishop, even decades after leaving Alexandria. Even when writing about the most mundane technical problems, his letters carry the unmistakable tone of a student addressing a beloved teacher. Did I do this correctly? Does this make sense? Would you be proud of this work? And though Hypatia's answers are lost to time's destruction, we can imagine what she would have said. Keep thinking, keep questioning, keep seeking truth wherever it leads. That's what real philosophers do. Mother, sister, teacher, benefactress. 4 words. None quite right. Together, almost enough. Almost.